evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. This isn't a prayer service. It's really a pleasure to welcome all of you to the E. Pauline Riall Lecture Series, this being the first of our 1993-94 season. It's also very, very edifying to see such a wonderful crowd here tonight and such a interesting mix of people, our students, members of the community, and I've noticed in the audience a great number of teachers and educational staff. I wish some of our critics of education could see this group tonight. You're all supposed to be home watching television and not doing anything and fluffing off. The fact of the matter is you're here tonight for professional development and to learn and hopefully transfer that to our young people. It always gives me a sense of almost humility at the Riall Lecture because of the person that this lecture series is named after, E. Pauline Riall. She gave 40 years of loyal service to this university, from 1929 to 1969, and after that was always seen on the campus or in the library or visiting with friends. She just could not let go of education, and it's a fitting tribute to have these lectures in her name and in her memory. I'm sure she'd be very, very pleased to see the turnout tonight. We have a number of distinguished people with us, not the least being our distinguished speaker tonight. However, I would like to have one individual stand up in the audience and be recognized, and that's Maryland's Teacher of the Year, Miss Bonnie Walton. Bonnie. We've just seen Maryland's finest. And now I would like to call up to the podium Riall Professor of Education, Dr. Morris Bosman, to introduce our speaker for the evening.
Thank you. Our speaker this evening is a psychiatrist, social scientist, activist, and an outstanding educator. Currently serving as Associate Dean of the Yale University School of Medicine and the Maurice Falk Professor in Child Psychology. Dr. Comer has written almost 500 articles and chapters about education, child development, and race relations. He has served as a consultant to many projects, including Sesame Street, the Electric Company, and numerous organizational boards. He has received awards for his work, including 29 honorary degrees. It is my pleasure now to present to you on behalf of the E. Pauline Riall Lecture Program, Dr. James Comer. Dr. Comer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction and for the generous reception. It is a very great pleasure to be here this evening and to have an opportunity to speak with you. You are a very important audience. Educators are very important. The hope, the future of our country depends on you. If you thrive, we thrive, and if you don't, we're in trouble. So it's always a great opportunity to have to speak with educators. It's an important effort you're engaged in to provide all of our children the kind of academic and social skills necessary to succeed as adults. And a higher level of skill development is needed today than ever before in the history of the world. our society, if we're to be able to compete with other economies across the world, will need well-developed, well-educated young people. And if we are to have social order rather than the kind of chaos that is beginning to develop, we are going to need well-educated, successful young people. The social problems that are growing today are in part because of social policies that weren't put in place yesterday to allow families to function well, to give children the kind of development they need to be able to function well in school and in the kind of complex economy and society we have today. We've got to turn around what is taking place and make it possible for all children to succeed. And yet there is greater resistance to turning things around, to doing things differently. And we're going to have to convince a lot of people that we're going to have to work differently if all our children are to succeed. Change is difficult. Change is difficult because there's a kind of security in continuing to do what you've been doing even when it doesn't work. But I think it's possible to turn things around and to make it possible for people to understand that we must turn things around and then do it. And so I'd like to support my argument that we can turn things around, that we must, by talking about several things this evening. One is to talk about change and how science and technology and its utilization over the last half-decade has really changed the nature of community, changed the nature of family. Society has changed the way we rear children, the way we must rear children, and talk about that, and then talk about the kind of child development that is needed in this day and age to make it possible for all of our children to be able to succeed in school. And then talk about our school program, the one that we developed in New Haven and now is in many places across the country called the School Development Program, really as a response to the kinds of changes that have taken place in the society and the kind of education we feel is needed to make it possible for all children to succeed. The involvement of parents and educators in that process, the promotion of self-esteem among the children so that they can achieve in school. And then talk a little bit about what I think are the teacher preparation and the administrator preparation implications of the kinds of changes that have taken place and what we've found in our work. And then respond to questions that you raised from the audience. But before doing so, I would like to tell you just a little bit about the outcome of our school development program, tell you a little bit about that program, and then tell you a little bit about my own personal background, because my background is a source of insight and understanding about what could be done with children, particularly low-income children from minority backgrounds, and for all children. Our school program was initiated in 1968 in New Haven, Connecticut, in 2 elementary schools that were serving 99% black students, almost all poor students. The achievement, attendance, behavior was the lowest in the city and the worst in the city. The children by 4th grade were 19 and 18 months behind in language arts and mathematics. They had the worst attendance in the city, and there were serious behavior problems all the time. These were terrible, terrible schools. They were the worst in the city. By 1984, with no change in the socioeconomic makeup of the city, but long before that we had children at grade level, but by 1984, these children, same school, no change in the socioeconomic makeup, were tied for the 3rd and 4th highest levels of achievement in the city. They were a year above grade level in one school by the 4th grade. They were 7 months above grade level in the other. They had the best attendance in the city for the previous 5 years, and there were no serious behavior problems in these schools. So dramatic turnaround in these schools. But we had to understand what was going on, and some of that understanding, not much of that understanding, really came from my own background, and I'd like to share that with you because it's the source of my insight and was applied in our school program. My mother was born in rural Mississippi, and her father was a good man, but a sharecropper and extremely poor, but a good man. But he was killed by lightning when she was about 6 years of age, and there were no support programs during that time, and the children couldn't work the farm, and as a result of that, a cruel stepfather came into their lives, and he was abusive in every way and would not allow the children to go to school, even though my mother felt very much that education was the way to a better life. And so when she was 16 years of age, she ran away to East Chicago, Indiana, to a sister who had run away some years earlier, and she wanted to go to school and tried to go to school in East Chicago, but when it didn't work out, she had to leave school, and she declared that if I ever have children, I'm going to make certain that all of my children get an education. And then she set out to very, very, very carefully find my father. She didn't want to make a mistake, the same mistake that her mother made. My father had been married once before, and she wanted to make certain she wasn't getting into the wrong relationship. So she insisted that he bring a letter of recommendation from his ex-mother-in-law. But it worked out. My mother, with no education at all, worked as a domestic, and my father, with a 6th grade education, worked as a steel mill laborer. And the two of them, and eventually my mother, because my father died early, the two of them sent the 5 of us to college for 13 college degrees. Now, while that was happening in my family, I went off to elementary school with 3 friends from my neighborhood, black youngsters, who were just as bright, just as able as anybody in our school, and it was a predominantly white, highest socioeconomic school in town. They were just as bright as anybody in that school, and just as bright as anybody in our family. And yet my friends, all 3 of them, went on a downhill course. One died early from alcoholism, one spent a good part of his life in jail, and the third has been in and out of mental institutions all of his life. Now that's too much loss. No society can sustain that kind of loss of bright young people on an ongoing basis and expect to survive and thrive. And yet that's what we've been doing with lots and lots of young people across this country. Now, I didn't understand the difference and the problem at the time, but the difference really was my family, my parents were able to give us the kind of experience at home that allowed us to go into school and meet the expectations of the school and to have an opportunity to succeed there. The parents of my friends, although they wanted their children to succeed, were not able to do so, and the school people weren't able to make it possible for them to succeed. And so my friends went on a downhill course. By the time I finished medical school, they were headed on a downhill course, and I began to worry about that and began to worry about what was going to happen to young people who were not successful in school when the need and the level of education was going up, and because the economy was changing. And that led me away from a practice of general medicine into psychiatry, child psychiatry, and eventually preventive psychiatry, and focusing on schools as a place that we could make a difference for all children, regardless of their background. But when we went into the schools, we had to understand what was going on, because these schools were terrible, and there was nothing really to help us understand what was going on. And so we began our work, but we also began to think what had happened in the society. And that's when I began to realize the massive effect of the changes that were taking place in the society. So I want to talk about those changes just a little bit. A change in the nature of the economy that was brought about by the application of science and technology really to every aspect of American life after World War II, with a dramatic impact on community, child rearing, and child development. Yesterday, 1900 right up until 1945, we were a nation of small towns and rural areas, and even the cities were collections of small towns. And work and play was local, and parents and adults used to walk through the community to their jobs. And as a result of that, there was a great deal of interaction between the authority figures, and transportation was limited so that there weren't a lot of people coming in and out of the community, and communication was limited because there was no television and limited opportunity to hear other viewpoints and the like. As a result of this, it was a very predictable environment for children. And when parents were interacting with each other, they developed something of a bond in the community between all of the adults, and there was a sense of trust and respect to some extent among those adults. And there was a real sense of place and a real sense of belonging in such communities. Even when you had a low status place in the community, you still had a sense of place. And this really helped create a sense of community. And then these adults in the lives of children were really the source of all truth. Everything that a child knew about what was right, wrong, good, bad, came to him or her through adults they knew and adults they could trust to a great extent. And those adults spoke with a common tongue about what was right, wrong, good, and bad. You ask one, you might as well have asked them all, because they all said about the same thing. Now, that gave the adults a great deal of power to influence the development and behavior of children. And the school was really a natural part of the community. You bumped into your teacher in a variety of places and others, and the authority from the home was transferred directly to the school. Now, I became aware of that when I was a youngster because we used to go to the A&P store every Friday with our parents. And there was never a time that we didn't bump into somebody from our school. There was the custodian, the principal, the teacher, the clerk, and there was never a time in which there wasn't an exchange of information about how we were doing in school and what to do if we didn't do what we were supposed to do in school. So it's difficult to act up, but so much when you know you're going to bump into your teacher or someone from the school at least once a week. Nonetheless, I was like a number of 11-year-olds curious about my environment, and I used to like to explore that environment. And of course, early adolescents, pre-adolescents very much like that and could get into difficulty exploring that environment. And once when I was about 11 years of age and about to get into difficulty, the lady next door to where I was about to get into trouble was a sister from our church. And before I got home, my father knew what I was up to. I was fortunate. I had one of those progressive fathers who didn't spank me, but who pointed out to me, you know, if you want to be respected by the people in your neighborhood, the people in your church, there are certain things you can do, and there are certain things that you just can't do. Now, because I wanted to be respected, I didn't do those things, at least where anybody could see me. But the point I'm making is that all of those powerful adults in my life were locked in a conspiracy to make certain that I grew up to become a responsible person. Now, that occurred at a time when it didn't matter so much. If you didn't do well in school, and if you weren't successful there, you could leave, and you could go to the waterfront, the farm, the factory, a variety of places, and earn a living, take care of yourself, take care of your family, meet all of your adult tasks and responsibilities, feel good about yourself because you were able to do so, and be motivated to become a good child rearer and a responsible citizen of the society. Now, that was the case right up until 1945. And then there was very rapid change. Almost overnight, we became a nation of metropolitan areas with high mobility, rapid transportation, speedy communication, and television. Work and play was no longer local. There was decreased interaction between those important authority figures in the lives of children. Students today, very rarely can they walk hand to hand in school as I did with my third grade teacher. Because of education and information, people are better educated, more information than ever before. That promoted a number of movements, civil rights movement, the women's movement, all very liberating, all very important. They all had to happen, and yet they all decreased the common tongue, the agreement about what's right, wrong, good, and bad. And differences of opinion you can now hear all the time. Children are exposed to all the time. Transportation changed very dramatically. And today you can have breakfast in New York and late lunch in California. And we are literally, as a result of that, a nation of strangers. Teachers often drive long distances from where they live to where they work, and children don't know them on an informal basis as they once did. Television today brings attitudes, values, and ways from around the world and take them directly into the home and directly to the children, unlike in the past where adults could censor the information and censure children for acting on it inappropriately. Information today, much of it, goes directly to children without going through the adults. And often the information that children receive is different from the attitudes, values, and ways that the adults are trying to get them to live by. But most of all, children simply receive more information today than ever before. Now, I became aware of this first when my daughter, who's now 29 and an actress in Los Angeles, was 4 years of age. And my wife and I were both working, and we had a housekeeper who used to like to watch the soaps with my daughter. And once when I was packing to go away on a trip, my little 4-year-old came out, and she very solemnly shook her finger at me, and she said, "Now don't you have an affair?" She was 4. I was 16 before I knew what an affair was. Now, it's ironic that her first job in Hollywood was on Days of Our Lives, but at the time it was a problem because it points up the fact that children today receive more information than ever before in the history of the world, and yet they have less help in helping them learn how to manage that information, to integrate it into their developing psyches, to learn what to act on, what not to act on, than ever before. They need more adults in their lives. They have fewer adults in their lives. They have fewer because there are more two parents working, there are more single-parent families. We're all busy in a great variety of ways, and so children have insufficient support for development at a time when a higher level of development is needed than ever before, and there's more stimulation to deal with than ever before, more complexity than ever before. Also, we're at a time when if you fail in school, you can't go out and take a job on a waterfront foundry and a variety of other places. You are headed on a downhill course in life unless you are very, very lucky. And so for the individual and for the society, the development of children to a high level is tremendously important, and one of the few places still in a position to help children grow and develop is the school. And we must make it possible then for children to succeed in school, but we must pay more attention to the growth and development of children if they are to succeed. Now, these changes have affected all children across the socioeconomic spectrum, all racial, ethnic, religious groups. We see it in the violence, the vandalism, the sexual misconduct, and great numbers of problems that are cropping up in our society today. And yet, disproportionate numbers among African American, Latino, and Native American children, but also low-income, poor white children across the country. But these groups primarily because of the more traumatic social history. I won't talk about this now, but this is an underlying problem that we might come back to during the question period. But given the changes that have taken place in the society, the implication is that we must develop children differently. We must pay more attention to their development and provide more support for their development. And so I'd like to talk about the kind of development that is needed in this day and age before talking about our school development program as a response to these needs. Let's talk about children and how the development they need. Children are born totally dependent, and yet by 18 years of age, they need to have developed so that they can take care of all adult tasks and responsibilities, to become learners for life, to become workers, to become people who can live in and rear families, and to become responsible citizens of the society. Now, children are born into social networks of friends, kin, institutions that are important to them and their parents, and their parents are carriers of the attitudes, values, and ways of the social network. And as the parents care for their children, they make an attachment and a bond, and that bonding allows the parents to channel the aggressive energy that children are born with and to channel it into the energy of learning, work, and play. And also, rather than into destructive energy that can be destructive to the child and to the people around the child. Also, because of that attachment and bond, it permits the child to imitate the parents, to identify with them, and begin to internalize the attitudes, values, and ways of the children, of the parents. Now, they help the children grow, and to grow along many developmental pathways, but about 5 pathways are critically important for academic learning and social performance. One is the social interactive pathway, the second is the psycho-emotional, the third is the moral, the fourth is the linguistic, and the fifth is the intellectual cognitive that is most directly related to academic learning and growth. The preschool experiences that promote development along those pathways take place in almost incidental kinds of ways, and yet they are very, very important. And in school and in education, we've paid a lot of attention to the intellectual cognitive, to the linguistic, and we haven't paid as much attention to the other 3. And yet they are important because they permit the attachment, the bonding, the relationships in school that allow children to grow. Now, the development takes place in incidental kinds of ways. The 2-year-old who wants to play with the ball of another child does not know that he or she cannot just go over and take the ball, take Johnny's ball. He'll try to do that. And he'll waddle over and try and take the ball, and if Michael resists, he might pop him in the mouth and take the ball anyway. And the caretaker who is present has to say, Johnny, you cannot take Michael's ball. You will have to do something else until Michael is through, or maybe you and Michael can work it out so that you can play together, or just go away. But in the process of mediating that simple little experience, that caretaker helps the child grow along all those critical developmental pathways, how to interact well with other children learned in that process. The control of the impulse to hit and take and to act in appropriate, negotiate in appropriate kinds of ways, the beginning of psycho-emotional development. What is right and what is wrong is learned in that little interaction. Moral development, language is involved, thinking is involved, development along all of the pathways. Now, something more closely related to academic learning is reading. And those of us who like to read or recognize the importance of it began to read to our children at a very early age. And the child curls up on our lap at the end of a very busy day and has the parent to himself or herself, and reading becomes a very positive, charged, emotional experience. And also the stories that children like to hear deal with their fears and their anxieties anxieties and their doubts as little people growing up in a great, big, complex world. And so they want to hear those stories again and again and again and again. And about the last again, they've memorized the words and associated them with the picture on the page. And when we turn to that page, they begin to read from memory. And we get all excited. Say, look, Mom, Johnny can read. And when Grandma calls on the weekend, we say, guess what, Grandma? Johnny can read. Now, Johnny and Mary notice that all of those powerful adults, that they are programmed to please, and they want to please, are excited about the fact that they can read. And so they want to read more and more and more. And they want to master every aspect of their environment to win the approval of those powerful adults. And so the motivation for learning and the motivation for desirable, successful performance grows out of the relationship with those powerful adults and many other adults that the child will deal with until he or she has internalized the desire to learn, to master their environment. Now, also, the child being read to notices that the parent starts at the top of the page, that the parent reads from left to right and reads from top down and exclaims in certain ways. All of those are pre-reading skills. And that child goes to school either already reading or prepared to learn to read. Now, that child also goes to school prepared to sit and take in information when it's appropriate to do so, is spontaneous and curious when it's appropriate to do so, and is able to interact well with other children. Now, we like such children. We say they're bright and they're able, and we convey our feelings, our positive feelings about them. We convey that onto the child. And that enables the child to make the kind of positive attachment and bond to the teacher and to the people in the school and to the program of the school, the same kind of positive attachment and bond that the child made at home with parents. And now parents and school people are able to help that child grow and develop socially and academically. And children who have such experiences have the best chance then to move through the school and take advantage of the school experience. And if all goes well, the child eventually internalizes the desire to learn by 12 or so years of age and is then on a learning trajectory for himself or herself for life unless other things occur. Now, that's fine for children who are born into social networks that are part of the mainstream. But there are many, many, many children in this country who are born into non-mainstream social networks, where learning isn't a part of the culture of their family, where negotiating rather than fighting is not a part of what goes on in their homes and in their neighborhoods. And so they have experiences that take them to school not able to meet the expectation of the school. Some children never had anybody read to them before they entered school. Some children have rarely been off the few blocks around their homes and have not had the kind of mediated experiences that have helped them become learners and help them learn to manage their environment successfully. These children go to school and present themselves in ways in which they are viewed as bad. Rather than negotiate, they fight. They take things. They pop people in the mouth. They're troublesome to teachers and other children. And so they are viewed as bad, and they are thought of as not so bright. Now, through no fault of their own, because many educators were not prepared to think about these issues in that way, the response is to try and control the children, to punish the children, to punish the badness out of them, rather than to understand that these children are underdeveloped, that they are differently developed, that they are developed so that they can function well in the playground, the housing project, a variety of other places, but in ways that get them into trouble in school. And so what happens is that these children come into school and there's a difficult interaction between the child and the school, and eventually between the school and the parents, and the school, the parents, and the child then all go on a downhill course, and it becomes a low, underachieving place. Now, that's what we found when we went into the schools in 1968. That's what was wrong. That's why there was apathy, aggression, low achievement, and everybody was burned out, and staff and the like. But we looked behind and we said, what else is going on here? Well, what was going on the side of the families, that because the families were under economic and social pressure, these families could not give their children the kind of preschool experiences they needed to succeed in school. Back to my friends that I grew up with, that's what was wrong with them. They were bright, able young people who did not have the support for development that they needed. They were differently developed. The staff, through no fault of their own again, was not prepared to understand that this was underdeveloped, different development, and that they could support the development of the children in school. The organization, the management of the school was such that even when the teachers and the administrators and all understood that there was need for special support, the school would not allow them to be flexible and for parents and others to get involved in a way that they could work together to support the development of the children. Well, that's what we found, and that's what we had to change. Now, I'm going to sound, as I described our school development program, I'm going to sound like we knew what we were doing, but we didn't. We had to find our way, and it was very difficult, and I make it sound much too easy when I talk. But in order to survive, because we were almost thrown out of the school the first year, in order to survive, we created a governance and management team, which might have been the first school-based management group. But we created this governance and management team made up of parents, teachers, administrators, all the adult stakeholders in the school, representative of the custodians and the clerks and so on. But all the adult stakeholders were on this governance and management team. And out of this team emerged a 9-element program that is now called the School Development Program and affectionately called by my friends the Comer Process, but I call it the School Development Program. 9-element program that had 3 mechanisms, 3 operations, and 3 guidelines. The mechanisms was the governance and management team, the parents program, and the mental health team. The governance and management team was the most important component because this group of people, parents, teachers, administrators, the nurses, whoever was in the school in support capacity and the like, planned the program of the school together. But also think about who these people are and what we did. By bringing these people together, we had restored community. We brought the key elements from that school community together in the school. They were, and the school now became the place where there was a community as opposed to the community outside of the school. And this group planned the academic and social program of the school, the comprehensive school plan that they developed, and carried out other management activities like staff development to carry out the goals in the comprehensive school plan, and assessment and modification of the comprehensive school plan, the program on the school on an ongoing basis. And then the other mechanism in the school was the parents program. In many schools there are PTAs and PTOs and other groups that do things that are peripheral and not related to the program of the school. We had the parents group directly involved in supporting the activities of the school and helping to create the desirable social climate in the school. Because as a child development person, I knew that it was impossible for children to grow and grow well in a disruptive climate. And so what we had to do was create good social relationships between all of the adults and between the adults and the children to support the development of the children. And so the parents took a major role in doing that, but worked on programs that the staff and parents together developed in support of the school program. And then the mental health team. help the teachers, the classroom teachers, think about child development issues. What happens in many schools today even is that the psychologist, social worker, special education teacher, and all those other people come in and they all work separately and they never talk to each other. And they never, very frequently, do not talk to the school staff or share their knowledge with the rest of the school staff. So we asked them to work as a team, because what we found is that there was a great deal of fragmentation, great deal of waste. We found one child who was being seen by 7 different helpers: psychologists, social workers, special reading teacher, lots of other people. None of them talked to each other. And that child was being yanked in and out of the classroom. No way that they could help that child. But when they began to work as a team, we reduced the fragmentation, the overlap, and also people began to focus on the underlying problem rather than seeing the child as the source of the problem. We had a member of the mental health team serve on the governance and management team so that they could begin to change the program of the school to make it supportive of child development. And then we had to develop some guidelines, because what happens in schools, in any institution that is not functioning well, people begin to point the finger of blame at each other when things aren't going well. And so they're always mad at each other and always accusing each other. We developed then a no-fault policy. The problems of our school are not due to the children, the parents, the teachers, the administrators, the society, or anybody else. We have to pay attention to solving problems as they come up in our school. So that was the no-fault policy that got generated in the governance and management team and then permeated the entire school. The second guideline was that making decisions by consensus rather than vote. Because when you vote, you have a winner and you have a loser. And the losers often say, well, you won, you do it. With that, you don't have the cooperation and support of everybody. We developed a consensus approach where you try one approach, and if that didn't work, we try the other group's approach, but maybe you try a third approach that you discovered trying to carry out the first. And then finally, you can't paralyze the principal, and a principal could not ignore the input from the other members of the team. Those 3 mechanisms, 3 operations, and 3 guidelines transformed the school. Not only the way we did things, but the spirit of the school. And so I went this morning into a school. Now we've disseminated the program into 300 plus schools across the country in 26 school districts. And this morning I went into a very tough section of Washington, D.C., and it was a remarkable place. The children got along with each other. Many parents were there. The teachers were interacting freely, and they had the same kind of dramatic gains academically that we've had in our original program and now having in many programs across the country. But it is the transformation of the school and the spirit of the school that makes this possible. Let me give you one example of how it works and move on and begin to close and respond to questions. Let me give you one example. We had a youngster who was in rural North Carolina on a Friday, and a visiting relative brought him up to New Haven over the weekend, and on her way to work, dropped him off in the school. Well, the principal took him directly to the classroom. The teacher had had 3 transfers the week before, and this is common in low-income neighborhoods, and she was frustrated, and with a nod of her head, frustration, she conveyed rejection to the youngster. And this 8-year-old looked at the teacher, he looked at this strange classroom, he panicked. He kicked the teacher in the leg, and he ran out. Now, we thought that was a fairly healthy response for an 8-year-old. But it's the kind of response that gets a child into trouble. The child gets sent to the principal. The principal scolds him, punishes him, sends him back to the classroom. Another child laughs. He punches that child in the mouth, and he gets sent back to the principal. And the principal scolds him and punishes him, and he goes around and around and around, more frustrated, more failure for the child. And finally, he's labeled disturbed. And then he's sent off to somebody like me to have his head fixed. And we had a meeting. We talked about what it must be like to be 8 years of age and have all of the adults in your life that you trust and you know removed. And the teachers began to think of what that must be like. And they began to think of what they could do in the classroom to make it possible for that child to succeed. Assign him to a successful youngster for help, to be able to talk to the class about who he is, where he's from, who he's living with here. All the things that teachers know how to do and can figure out how to do if you understand the principle. This is a child who needs support, and needs support for his development, needs support handling a new situation, and so on. Then we asked, what's wrong with our school? Not just the child, not just the classroom. What's wrong with our school? What's wrong with our procedures? You shouldn't bring a child in and dump him or her in the classroom with no support, with no orientation. And so the governance and management team then took that understanding from the mental health team, and they passed new regulations that came up with new ways of managing or transfers within the school. And with every child that came in then fared much, much better. And every incident, every problem in the school, we attacked in that manner. Not punishing children, not finding the problem with the staff, but looking at the dynamics and looking at the developmental needs of the children and addressing that by changing the policies within the school. And one after two, after three incidents, you could feel the climate began to change. And the staff began to think that they could respond to these problems. They could handle these problems. They did not have to punish the children. They did not have to send them down to the principal. They did not have to refer them to the psychologist and the social worker. The staff could handle the problems. And they began to become people who would think about what's going on with children and make adjustments within the school. Now, the school began to change very dramatically. And yet, our test scores weren't going up. And the staff began to say, what's the matter? They said, our children are as bright as anybody. They ought to be able to be doing as well. And out of that thinking, we said, what's the difference between our children and middle-income children? The only difference is that middle-income children receive experiences at home that prepare them to be successful in school. And we said, we can do that in school. Now, rather than impose that on the parents, we asked the parents, what do you want for your children? And they began to talk about it. And we said, well, what kinds of skills and experiences will they need to get from where they are to where they want to go? And they began to talk about them. And then we looked at those experiences and we classified them. And they were experiences in politics and government, business and economics, health and nutrition, spiritual leisure time activities. And in what was free or elective time, we developed units in which we integrated the teaching of basic skills, social skills, appreciation of the arts around those particular units. And so the parents were involved, the teachers were involved together in providing the children with the experiences they need. And let me give you just one example. When we started, there was a mayoralty contest going on in the city. And we invited the candidates in to give speeches, and the children wrote letters to them inviting them in. The parents took money that they had raised in their social climate activities, the social calendar that they have for the entire year. They took money from those activities and they rented buses. And the staff and the parents took the children around the city, and they showed them the city and talked about the relationship between government and conditions within the city. And the children talked about it, they came back and they wrote about it, and those are language, arts, social science lessons. The children were taught to be hosts for the candidates, which were social skills for the fair that we had where the candidates came in. And they put on a dance drama program, which was appreciation of the arts. And so there was an integration, again, of the basic skills, social skills, and the appreciation of the arts. as we did that and gave the children the kinds of experiences that mainstream children have, the staff began to see the potential of the children, the parents began to see the potential, and the children began to see their own potential. And there was a dramatic turnaround in the achievement and performance of the children. In all the schools we've gone into now, we've used a similar approach and had similar outcomes when you have stability long enough. This doesn't happen overnight. It takes at least a year to change the social climate in the best of conditions, and it takes 3 years often, and it takes 3 to 5 years to get academic change. But the point is that that under the most difficult socioeconomic circumstances, you can still get dramatic academic and social change. We've now moved to middle schools and getting similar kinds of outcomes, and even in high schools, the 2 high schools we've worked in, we've had positive kinds of outcomes. Our program does not include a curriculum component, but we're beginning to look at that and also have a developmental aspect of the curriculum. But we are now working with Ted Sizer and his curriculum and instruction approach, Howard Gardner with his assessment approach, and Janet Whitlaw with the use of technology. We feel by fusing our 4 programs, we will provide a kind of educational experience that will help all children grow and develop and to be able to succeed as adults. I'd like to close by talking about the teacher preparation implications of the kind of work that we have been doing. There have been many innovations in education over the years, and I would argue that many don't work not because these aren't great ideas, but because we often don't change the way teachers work, think, and we don't often give them the kind of support they need to work differently. And I think that that is what's very important if we're to change education, is that the pre-service education of children, of teachers needs to pay a lot of attention to child development, relationship issues, and child rearing. And the in-service teachers need lots of support to work differently and to focus on support for development and creating the kinds of environment that will allow them to support the development of children. I also think that we have to select for the ability to relate to children. It's not enough to be a very smart person yourself. You can be very, very smart and not be able to teach. So it's very, very important, very important in my opinion, to select so that you get very smart people who also are able to relate very well to children. Finally, I think that it is very important to reward people who are preparing teachers, many of the people who get out into the field and into the real world and working with teacher graduates in the real world, to reward them in academic institutions. Too often the rewards are not in the field, they are back at the academy. The only way we're going to get, in my opinion, really good teachers is to have conditions so that teachers can learn out in the field, and that's the necessary change. Let me close and respond to your questions by again saying that education is tremendously important. We simply cannot compete with the other post-industrial countries of the world, Japan, Germany, Western Europe in general. We're simply not going to compete unless we can make it possible for all of our children to succeed at a high academic level, but also at a social level that is appropriate. We are going to face increasing and rapid deterioration unless we can give young people the kinds of experiences they need in school to learn the social rules of the game and to be committed to living by the social rules of the game as adults. It is young people like that, young people who can think for themselves, and young people who can work in situations in which they can work in cooperative, collaborative kinds of ways, who are going to make a difference just for themselves, their families, but also for American industry, for American business. And it is then that we will create a society that can survive and thrive into the 21st century and beyond. With that, I'll stop. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll respond to questions that people have. Yes.
Sounds to me, Dr. Comer, like you're trying to recreate 1945 gradually. The school system is going to be the ideal thing for turning out to be surrogate.
Yeah, to some extent, and the school's going to need some support with that. The school can't do it alone. We're going to have to build something in, and that's beginning to happen. We're working with Dr. Ed Ziegler, who was involved and founded Head Start, and he's developed a program called Schools of the 21st Century, and we've developed a model with him called COSI, Comer-Ziegler, in which we bring together the social service institutions that reach back to the family and support those families and involve the families very early in the care of their children. I've also talked to a few governors who are talking about reinventing government and thinking about those service institutions not as kind of maintenance, it's not social welfare, not as maintenance, but social welfare for the purpose of allowing families to function in ways that will support the development of their children. And so what we're trying to do is look at a family system that is crumbling and provide the kind of supports around the family that will then enable them to prepare their children so they can function well in school. But the school has to play a greater and central role because it is the only mainstream institution in the pathway, in the growth pathway of most children, of all children, and particularly low-income children where you've had a great deal of deterioration. And so the school has to be very important. I understand the teacher and the administrator and others who said that's not our job. I understand. And yet there is nobody else. If it is not your job, whose job is it? In many places, we don't have the families and the social networks and so on that once existed. And where they exist, they're negative and troublesome. Some mainstream institution has to be there. And in my opinion, it has to be the school. The school reinvented. The government reinvented also. I think you had a question. On our program, there's my book called School Power describes it in great detail, and my book, Maggie's American Dream, describes my insight from my own family experience as well as the school program. Yes?
I work in the state prison, and I see the end result of what has to happen.
Right.
Because of the economic problems of the people.
Right.
They still are at the same developmental stage as what we started in the school.
Absolutely.
All the problems with them, and I'm hoping for the country.
Well, thank you. You know, we're concerned about all those social problems, and they are costing us a bundle. You know, I'm on the board for the state universities in Connecticut, and there's not enough money for higher education because the money has to be spent to build more prisons. The only budget that was not cut for the state of Connecticut was not the budget for health, was not the budget for education, it was the budget for corrections. Now that makes no sense. We just can't keep doing that. We lower the standards grades and levels of education, and at the same time, the problems, social problems, are increasing. But these aren't bad kids. These aren't bad people. You find many of the people in prison not bad kids. Things get worse and worse and worse, and you begin to get worse and worse behaviors. But they're kids who could be successful if they had different kinds of experiences and much more support at an earlier age. And that's what we must do. Yes. Right. Yeah. 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 Change is extremely difficult. Let me tell you a story that an example of that problem that we had. When we finished the first two schools, or when we got dramatic change in the first two schools, and New Haven wanted to try it in other schools, we decided to go to a school a mile down the street from the one we were in. And the principal there said to me, you know, you're not going to have the same success here that you had down at King's School. And I said, why? They're poor just like down there. He said, yeah, those people are poor. He said, but they live in single-family homes. He said, our people live in a housing project. And I said, well, but in our other school that did well, they lived in a housing project. He said, yeah, but those are two-story housing projects. Ours are multi-family. Now, to his credit, once he got involved in the process, he became a great supporter of the program and did a fine job. But but change was a problem, and so he was resisting. Also, there was information and misinformation. He had been told that multifamily housing projects had multi-problem people and families and so on. And he believed that. And the literature is right and wrong. That's true, but change the conditions and many of those people can function very well. They need certain kinds of support. And there's simple resistance to change because change requires you to function at a level of that creates insecurity. A story I always like to tell on myself. I always wanted a boat since the time I was a little kid. And when I got 55, I realized that unless I went out and got that boat, I was never going to have a boat. So about 4 years ago, in the middle of the winter, I went out and I bought a boat. And I put that boat on Martha's Vineyard and in the summer, and I didn't know anything about boats. I got out there and I bumped into the bridge and I tore up 3 propellers, and it was a disaster, And I found myself waking up in the morning and praying that it would rain so that I didn't have to go out on my boat. But the next summer I only have 2 propellers and then 1, and then this summer I got through without losing a propeller, and so I enjoy my boat. Now the problem is that when we're asked to change, we're raised to a level of incompetence that we find painful, and it's difficult, and so we don't want to do it, and we want to hold on to what we have, and we hope somehow, some way, things will get better. Now, what we need, and what happened to me, is one of the neighbors went out and helped me through those early difficult stages, and what we need is help for the people who have to go through the change, and that's where our program is modeled, is to support the staff as they move through these changes. We're going to have to do that. We need political leaders who help us understand that these didn't start out as bad kids. I used to deliver babies early in the morning, 2, 3. And it was like a wonderful experience. But what I was always struck with is that there wasn't a single bad kid there. Somehow between there and the prison, something happened. And what happened was that those kids did not get the support for development that they needed, and they got the wrong support. We got to get people to understand that. People aren't born good and bad. People aren't born just bright and able to do it, and they can turn their machine on and be motivated to do it, turn it on and off at will. It isn't a matter of simple will, and it isn't a matter of simple intelligence. Our intelligence and our ability to perform develops, and it develops through the help and the input of lots of people. And our motivation develops from that beginning little child learning to read because of a caring parent is concerned and interested. That's the beginning. And that motivation has to be promoted and developed. And we have to create institutions that motivate in that way. And we have to help people begin to understand that that's the way human beings function. And that's when they begin to function in positive kinds of ways. So a lot of education, a lot of help and support has to go into it. And it all has to be done very rapidly, because we cannot lose one more generation. You know? Think about something. My three friends had maybe 20-some children among them, 25, 30 children. And most of their children also went on a downhill course. Now their children are going on a downhill course, and you're getting a geometric progression of the problem. My wife and I, of the four of us, we had 2 children, and they're not married yet. So we've got a problem that children are growing up in, many children are growing up in families that are functioning least well, and they're having the most children. Families functioning best are having the least children. That's why we need institutions that begin to do more in helping people rear their children. But our society can't keep doing that. We can't keep growing problems at that rate, or we've got to go on a downhill course. And by 2030, we'll be a third world country. And so we've got to make a difference, and we've got to get people to see what's going on and to see that we've got to invest in the education, support, and development of all the children. Yes, here and then here. Again, the resistance. With that kind of outcome, why is it only 26 school districts? Because there's resistance, and people try and find all kinds of reasons for explaining why it's not necessary, why it worked in our case but won't work in other cases and the like. As a matter of fact, that's why we began to disseminate the model, because people said that worked only because you were there, and it worked only because of your charisma. I'm still looking for my charisma, but that's not true. And we had to demonstrate that we could take the model other places, and without our presence, it could happen. But the resistance to change is enormous. There's something else. Our model requires attention to development. Now, education, through no fault of present educators, does not focus on development to the extent that it needs to. And where it does, it often is academic development and not applied, not real world kinds of how do you help, and it's often on development and not on child rearing and helping them grow so that they can function. Example, I have 3 sister-in-laws who are all teachers, graduates of good schools, and once on vacation, I asked them, when we were all together, I said, did anyone ever talk to you in your education program about a fight and the developmental issues involved? And they all looked at each other. No. Well, how could you do that when you go into any elementary school, any kindergarten, in any socioeconomic level, every socioeconomic level across this country, and you're going to see kids fighting? Now, what's going on? Are they just being bad? Or do they have impulse control problems? Have they not been able to manage their aggression well? Are they not able to negotiate? All of of these are issues that ought to be in the mind of every teacher on the front line. And you ought to be able to respond in ways other than punishing. You ought to be able to talk to kids and encourage them in ways that help them develop the capacity to control their impulse to hit and take and the like. But I could go on and on and on in naming all the developmental issues that teachers need to be able to address, and from the very beginning. But we're not doing that. I wandered away from your question, but let's see, I think right here, and maybe. Well, I don't think so, because teachers are excited, and everybody's excited when kids you least expect to be able to succeed. And I don't think it's basically racial either. I think it is not being able, most of the teachers are not trained in ways, and the administrators are not trained in ways that they can relate to parents from different socioeconomic, racial backgrounds, and to help them help their children grow. It is simply not having the knowledge and skills. Now, there are many teachers, I'd say a third, who intuitively understand many of these things and who can respond. But that's not enough. There are many more teachers who are absolutely capable with some support and training of responding differently. There are about a third that probably ought to be counseled into some other field. That's why selection is very important. But I don't think that there's a deliberate effort on the part of any teacher to hurt any child. Many simply weren't prepared. Let's take a couple more questions. Yes. Yeah. Yep. 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 Well, you're absolutely right. That's a very big problem. On the other hand, the people who say money is not the answer are correct also. That money isn't the answer alone. It is working differently with children, supporting their development, creating the climate. All of that must happen. But in addition to that, you need enough money. You need enough money for the kind of support people that we're talking about, for the kinds of special programs, community programs, outreach programs that we need. You need money for that. And you need money for decent buildings and facilities and the like. It is disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful, some of the places in Chicago and New York and the like, Washington, where we send our children to school. And yet within those buildings, you see remarkable teachers, parents, and administrators doing a great job. But it is disgraceful. I've been to schools in third world countries that look better than what we have in many of our communities. So we need money, but we also need to work differently. And we need to stop fighting each other about whether it's money or the way we work. It's both. Final question from the back. Yeah. Yeah. For one thing, and many schools are now doing this, is getting teacher candidates into the school earlier. Early in their careers, so they find out whether they work well with children. And also that's why it's important to have people from schools preparing teachers out in those buildings where they can see whether they work well with children or not, and with parents or not. And there needs to be some kind of period where you counsel people in or out. Both of my children are in the arts, one an actress and one writer. And when they were were coming through their training programs, mid-training program, there were discussions with them about whether they had it or not. And many young people were counseled out of those programs. Now, I don't think that in education we should sit and let anybody who wants to become a teacher become a teacher. Teaching is probably the most important profession there is. And so I think selection is terribly important. There are other ways, and I won't go into detail about those, but I think schools, boards of education and personnel offices and the like need to start sending a signal of the kinds of people that they need. Okay, with that, let me say again that it's been a great pleasure being here. You've been a great audience. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You're invited to some refreshments in the social room.